Hello, everyone. I'm Mayor Eric Pappenfuss. Thanks for joining us. Today is another Friday at noon, and we have a community conversation here, an important one on Facebook Live. So welcome again. We've been doing these now for several months, and we'll be continuing to do so. But today's a special show because I had some help organizing and gathering the guests from the Harrisburg Black Think Tank. And I want to start by thanking them for putting this panel together. We're going to have a conversation, a forum on race in Harrisburg. We're going to touch on a lot of issues from policing reform to education to COVID-19. Should be a lively discussion. I'll start by just mentioning our guests. We have Terrence Webb joining us. He is the CEO and president of the Harrisburg Business Group. I want to thank him especially for his help in putting this panel together. We're also joined by Brian Carter. Brian, you know from the Harrisburg School Board, but he is also a board member of the Harrisburg Community Black Think Tank. We have Eric Jackson with us. He's the assistant pastor of Kingdom Embassy Church, and he's also an educator in the Harrisburg School District. We have Greg McClanahan, who is a financial advisor to many PA school districts and municipal governments for over 28 years, a wealth of experience there. We're joined by Senator John DeSanto. As you know, he is the senator for this district. And we are also joined today by George Scott, who is a Lutheran pastor, a retired Army officer, and he's currently running as a Democrat for that Senate seat. So we're going to have a great conversation and looking forward to engaging with all of our guests on the topic of the day. First, though, I want to start with a few general announcements, as we always do. And I wanted to begin by commending everyone who participated in last night's City Council Town Hall on the Police Advisory Board. I watched on YouTube, as many did, listened to all the feedback and all the questions, and I thought it was a really good event. Now, I understand that there are many more people that want to participate than were able to participate last night, and that's why City Council has organized 2 more town hall meetings before they return to session at the end of August. One of those is coming up here on the 11th, and that's going to be another Zoom meeting. And then on the 18th, there's going to be an in-person town hall at Reservoir Park, much like the town hall that we had a few weeks ago. There'll be plenty of room for social distancing and for asking questions directly. Now, again, the purpose of these town halls is in part to give commentary on council's decision to craft an advisory or review board. There's a lot of feedback about changes the public wanted to see. I think council is listening and is interested in incorporating those changes into the final bill. So in my opinion, the process is going very well, and I'm on record as saying I'm going to be supportive of whatever measure council finally passes. What I don't want to see is what happened last time, which is there was an inability to sort of reach consensus and nothing got done. We need a board now more than ever in Harrisburg, and so if council passes it, I'm going to do my part to make it as workable and as effective as possible. So again, those dates are the 11th for Zoom. There'll be information on the website about the Zoom sign-in. And the way it worked last night, if you didn't get a chance to see it, it was very organized. You just call in, wait for council to recognize your phone number, and then you can speak and ask questions. And there were actually a number of people last night that asked multiple questions. It lasted a full 2 hours. It was a very good dialogue. Then on the 18th, if technology is not your thing, come on out to Reservoir Park for an in-person town hall. And then City Council is back in session on the 25th of August. And we will be continuing virtual City Council sessions during this time of coronavirus, so that will also be on Zoom. But there's lots of opportunity, and they've said that they're going to have even more meetings and continue this into the fall. They're not going to just pass something to pass it. They're going to pass it because it's the right thing to pass. And I'm just encouraged by the way our democracy is working and the amount of feedback that we're getting. Much more interest in this bill than we've had in any other bill for as long as I've been mayor. Also, in terms of announcements, I wanted to let people know that our campaign, our publicity campaign to support locally owned businesses is very much underway. It's called Choose HBG. And you can find out more about it if you haven't yet at the Harrisburg website, harrisburgpa.gov/choosehbg. And you can follow on social media and click on the hashtag ChooseHBG. And among other things, you're going to see me tweeting about my visits to many of these businesses that have signed up. Now, this is a program that was available for any Harrisburg-based small business to become a part of. It's mostly a marketing campaign. follow me on Twitter if you want to know where I'm going to be having lunch, because I will be having lunch after this show in Harrisburg. I'm choosing HBG, and I don't know which place I'm going to choose yet, but I will totally tweet my lunch. I'm going to continue to tweet and do social media for these businesses over the course of the month. So is the Visitors Bureau, so are other organizations, and I want to encourage everyone to spend our dollars locally. Businesses continue to be hurting, and we want to give them as much support as we can. Another update, if you were wondering, the trash credit program for businesses that were forced to shut down, the city, as you may know, was offering a credit on the trash bill to help small businesses that were forced to shut down, and it was going to be a forward-looking credit for the last quarter of this year. The application process for that credit is now closed. We received several hundred applications, and you should be receiving a letter shortly, I would say within about a week, if you were approved for that credit program. And then you'll start to see the credit on your bills for September, and then October, and November, and December. So we're pleased to continue our sort of business stimulus efforts at helping small businesses, and that's one area that we can help, which is with sanitation bills. Also, from a utility service standpoint, if you missed last week's show, you missed a good one, because we were over at the Public Works Center and we were talking about commentary that we were seeing on Facebook and elsewhere about illegal dumping and street sweeping. And you may have learned that on last week's show that CRW, the Capital Region Water, the water authority, has now taken over street sweeping. They had previously privatized street sweeping. They were having a great deal of trouble with their contractor, which was not performing up to expectations and was causing a lot of clear problems in the community. They have since taken that in-house, and they have begun their own street sweeping. That began this past week, and hopefully we're going to see an improvement in the quality of street sweeping in the city. And if anyone continues to have questions about that, we can direct them to Capital Region Water. But I think by bringing it in-house, you're going to find a much more responsive community spirit from Capital Region Water than we did from the private contractor. Also, movie nights continuing at Reservoir Park, and in fact tonight is Black Panther. So if you're free tonight, head on over to Reservoir Park, free for the whole family. Bring a lawn chair. Hopefully it won't rain. Enjoy Black Panther, and then I think next week is Remember the Titans. Remember the Titans is next week. So check out those movie nights. Something to do for the whole family. And then finally, in terms of announcements, I wanted to end with our BioBot data. As regular viewers of the show know, we've been following the testing of our wastewater treatment plant to determine the prevalence of the virus that is shed by individuals in the Capital Region Water area. We're showing a fairly steady pace in the month of end of July and August. We're not showing a rapid increase, but we're still much higher than testing results are revealing. The latest results were 6%, an estimate that 6% of the population is carrying the coronavirus. And again, that is because many people that have the virus don't know they have the virus, are asymptomatic. And the testing of the wastewater has shown repeatedly that there are many more people that have the virus than are actually being tested for it. So keep that in mind. But we haven't seen a spike or an increase. And so in that sense, we're way down from where we were in June earlier in the summer. So that's somewhat encouraging, even if 1 out of 20 people, when you think about it, may have the virus is an alarming and astoundingly high number. So we're not through the woods. It's something that we have to continue to be safe. Wear your masks. I have mine here. Taking it off for the show. Continue to be socially distant, and we will make it through it together. Also, by popular demand, next week's show, we are trying to get some leading healthcare advocates from UPMC, Hamilton Health, and elsewhere together to talk about the issue of coronavirus testing. So have not been able to confirm the guests yet, but that is the plan for next week's show. So hopefully you'll be able to tune in and learn more then. All right, let's turn to the topic at hand, and I want to begin with Mr. Terrence Webb. Terrence, it's great to see you this morning. Thank you so much for joining us and helping put this panel together. I want to have a dialogue with you, and I thought we could start with the topic of police reform. And happy to share my thoughts on aspects of this topic. But let me begin with you, and and ask you: have you been following the story regarding coming up with legislation for a police review board in Harrisburg? And what are your thoughts on that? And what are from your perspective, are the important reforms that you'd like to see the city of Harrisburg, both administratively and legislatively, take currently with regard to policing?
Well, first of all, I'd like to thank you very much, Mr. Mayor, for allowing us to put this forum together. It's a very important and critical conversation that needs to be had. It's long overdue. And you and I have talked many times in the past about different aspects of this. With regards to the Community Review Board, I think that that's something that is absolutely necessary and critical. Not only do I think that there should be a police review board from a standpoint of the community, but I think from every aspect of elected government officials, I think that we should have oversight every auspices that there is with regards to government. But since we're talking and dealing directly with, the city at this moment, I'm glad that we have Senator DeSantis here, because I'd like to, also, refer that same statement to him, that we need to be looking at oversight, because the thing here has been, in the past, we have elected officials and kind of let them go and do whatever, and they have been kind of running rimshot over us without us having any input to it. I think the roles need to be reversed. Those folks are hired by us, they work for us, they're paid by us, yet they don't answer to us properly. So I think that review boards are something extremely important and necessary.
Great. And if you're watching at home, we're going to have I'm going to have a dialogue with each of the guests first, and then we're going to have a second round where we'll let the guests ask each other a question, and perhaps you'll want to direct a question to Senator DeSantis at that time. But Terrence, let's talk a little bit. So accountability, in your mind, is at the heart of good government, and I think that's true for many people. I certainly agree. I think one of the reasons why that police advisory board or review board is so important is because it will allow a sort of spotlight on issues which sometimes just aren't at the forefront of public attention. By putting community members from throughout the city, and the proposal is that individuals will represent the various districts, policing districts of the city, and be city residents, and some will have experience in social work or mental health fields or other things. It'll be a diverse and strong board of city residents. There can be advocacy for policy change. There can be holding elected officials accountable, as you say, and there can also be oversight and of the police bureau. Now, one thing which I don't think the public fully understands is that right now we do have the ability to fire and to remove police officers that break the law or that act inappropriately. You may have seen that earlier this year there was an incident where a Harrisburg police officer, actually in the academy, was found to have on social media made inappropriate statements, and within 24 hours of finding that out and investigating that out, we terminated that individual. I have personally both fired and disciplined Harrisburg police officers for acting out of line. And so today's topic is institutional racism in Harrisburg, how it affects all aspects of our community, including policing. What more would you like to see in terms of accountability? What are your recommendations for me as an elected official and for Harrisburg City Council? How can we get at the root causes, or how can we mitigate the root causes of institutional racism when it comes to policing in Harrisburg?
Well, I think right off the rip, something that has been historically kind of played with back and forth. I think that the residency requirement for police officers is a critical component of that. I think that knowing the community a little better. We had talked on our last program about doing some active recruiting from within the school district, and setting a program in place where we would kind of make that as a part of the curriculum as they go through, and maybe like they do with ROTC training and those kinds of things. I think that you have to have people who can identify with the concerns and issues that we're looking at Harrisburg at something in the number of 46%, of Black population. Yet, we still remain just the highest population in incarceration and arrest. And I think that it is due to a lot of times the police not having a relationship with the community. They just have we're guarding you, as opposed to we're here to work with you. The protect and serve aspect of policing in Harrisburg and across the nation actually is something that is completely gone by the wayside for Black people. So that is one of the things that we really want to see, a better working and connection with the police and the community. I think that would be important.
Yes, thank you, Terrence. I certainly agree with that. Just in the spirit of dialogue, let me say that some of the complicating factors with that are that it's not that we're turning away applicants, it's that we don't have the applicants. And that can also be a legacy of institutional racism and other factors at work in the community, for sure. But every year for the past several years, when we've had a class at the academy, we have tried to hire as many as we could, and we've never been able to meet the number of qualified police officers. That is one of the reasons we were talking about creating a different type of pipeline, not the school to prison pipeline, but a workforce development type of pipeline, an academy concept in the school district that would help promote a career path for policing for our youth. That has been controversial. You've suggested, but I've suggested putting that in as part of the curriculum. And there's currently a movement that really wants no part of police in schools. And we're not talking about police in schools to arrest or discipline, or with weapons. We're talking about police as instructors or trying to create a career path. I mean, do you see that in your mind as appropriate and a potential way to sort of build up our numbers and have a more reflective police department?
Well, I certainly do. And let me just kind of disperse something that is a misnomer. And that is that the Black community has this, feeling of we don't want anything to do with with the police department. Certainly, there are some issues that are long-standing, that go back to times where we have yet to even address. But when you talk about those kinds of opportunities to be inclusive and bring our community into the real opportunity, I think that is something that is really possible for our community. We really want to be able to be involved. I think not just with the police department. I think we need to be involved with the district attorney's office. I think we need to be involved with every auspices that has to do with making decisions that impact us long-term and negatively. When you look at the war on drugs and those kinds of things, the crime bill, we're still reeling from that residually. Harrisburg has had a history of police killings of Black people that have yet to be addressed. I'd like to see us go back and revisit and maybe have a review board of those kinds of things, because there have been many shootings that I'm extremely aware of personally that have just gone by the wayside. One in particular was the young man who was killed at Dauphin County Prison here recently, and it was deemed as not an issue, and there was nothing to see here, move on. And I think that we've been dealing with that kind of mentality far too long, and we have yet to have real serious input into these kinds of things. So yeah, I think that you may hear some resistance from the community, from the standpoint of they're just frustrated at because when we talk about policing in the school, we're talking about resource officers who generally refer our kids to juvenile courts and then become a part of what is called the consent decree. That consent decree is part of the school to prison pipeline. These are things that our community maybe not be fully aware of, or maybe not able to fully articulate, but these are the problems that they're having. So when they have resistance, or they speak to resistance, is stemming from a historic continuum, as well as the resistance that we get from when we just come and say, hey, what's happening? And I just spoke with a police officer myself in that regard. So I think
you just mentioned something that I find very interesting, which is you talked a little bit about a model for the review board, which I don't think we've heard yet, but is something that I think is very interesting, which would be almost like a Truth and Reconciliation Commission in the apartheid South African model, but something which looks at historic cases as well, not just the present day, but leads to a better understanding of again the history and legacy of racism in Harrisburg, and I think that's something that would be very important and very interesting, and I'll share those comments as well. I definitely think a board could do that. And could make that a part of their mission, and it could look at the historical legacy of policing as much as the present day. And just a final point, and we're gonna keep going to all the guests, but one thing which is on the table that is going to potentially deal with this issue of how we can have more community-minded officers is to sort of redefine the definition of police officer in Harrisburg, and encourage, for some positions, hiring civilians, and with a sort of different criteria, and basically having what Commissioner Carter has called community service officers. So something I'm going to put out there as a possible way of filling our ranks with people that both represent and come from the community, and supplement the numbers that we have. We probably have to think broadly about how we define the term police officer. I want to turn next to Brian Carter, who is here. And Brian, we were just talking about police in schools, and I'd love your thoughts on this issue. It is a complicated one. And I do understand the concerns that many people have with school resource officers. When I've been supportive of the school resource officers, it's been very clear that I'm trying to define them as mentors and educators that are addressing, hopefully able to address the divide that we're seeing between the community and police. But I feel like there ought to be a way that we can have that without reinforcing the school to prison pipeline. But what are your thoughts? And I know it's a complicated issue, and it's something that not just Harrisburg but other school districts are also contemplating and facing. And welcome.
So my opinion about school resource officers, I believe that everyone should have a seat at the table, so everyone can have their opinions voiced, whether it's the community members, the school board, the receiver, the city, just the city in general. But my issue with school resource officers is there's a big disconnect with our policemen in our community. And a lot of our policemen don't know our community or do not familiarize themselves with our community. So just to have them in our schools, I would prefer them have some type of I would prefer them to have some type of training or something, pretty much working with children, or anything from that aspect. Pretty much with a lot that's taking place with police officers, it kind of worries you, because you don't know certain individuals' true intentions, or you don't know if they are accustomed to working in a setting with children. That's pretty much my take on it. That's pretty much my take.
Yeah. No, I agree with that. I think that mirrors my sentiment. I mean, you can't, not just anybody would possibly be appropriate for a school resource officer. You have to have people with real experiences that can connect and that are interested in educating and mentoring our youth. I do think we have police officers like that in Harrisburg. We have some, and that are very interested in becoming a part of the solution there. But it certainly isn't. It wouldn't be for everyone. Hey, so it's a great opportunity to have you here, and I want to expand the conversation to education. And one of the questions that I got in advance of the show was, every urban school district in Pennsylvania is challenged by low attendance, low standardized test scores, low graduation rates. In that sense, Harrisburg isn't much different. But the question is really what can be done to make Harrisburg different and to turn things around here. I've got some ideas, but in terms of top ideas for how we can improve things in Harrisburg, what's your main list?
So my main thing is we have a new administration. We have a receiver. Pretty much they are putting things in place so we can change our school district around. So we're just looking forward towards having an input from the community and everyone just coming together to push those plans together. Right now, financially, we're way better off than what we were a few years ago. So we just need that support from every elected official from the community just to come in and just to see the plan that we have laid out and just to help us push it forward. Our kids in our school district have a lot of potential. They are some of the best students that we came across in the past few years. We just need that support and that buy-in from the community and from every elected official to join in and to see how we can move the school district forward. One of the that's been concerning also is us being underfunded. We need more elected officials to join in on the conversation to make sure that we are not lacking the funds that we need to make sure that our kids get that successful education or to get that pretty much that's the main things that we need.
So I agree with you on the funding standpoint, and we can have a broader conversation about that. But there's something called the fair funding formula, and basically in Pennsylvania, the funding of the school districts is so tied to property taxes is basically tied to the wealth of the community that's there, and that's why you have these great disparities between school districts. And there's a fairer way to distribute state funding that would help compensate for that. And that's something that we all need to push for, and we can talk to others about their thoughts on that issue. And while the finances are in a decent shape now, there's no question that the impact, and I don't want to worry anyone, but the impact of COVID-19 is going to be felt, and is going to be felt very strongly, especially in 2021. We're going to have a situation where, while property taxes may be stable, a lot of other income is going to be less. The city and the school district, as you know, share earned income tax revenues, amusement tax revenues, things like that, and they make an important part of the funding for both the city's budget and the school district's budget, and those are going to take a hit. And so the disparity that the financial issues that we're seeing now is only going to become exacerbated. Let's talk a little bit about the return to school since I've got you here. How do you feel about the online model? Do you think it's working for our Harrisburg students? I know that the district has worked really hard, and we've partnered with them here at Channel 20 to try and bring access through television, to distribute portable devices, to make sure that internet access is available. But what are your thoughts on the back to school plan?
I think that the administration and I think that the new team has done a pretty good job, as well as our school board has done a pretty good job with pushing that our kids go to school virtually. As you can see, there has been a spike in COVID cases, and we want to put the health of our kids first, the health and safety of our kids first. So I believe that the virtual idea was a good idea. Also, I would like for you guys to continue to push to make sure that our kids can have that advantage of having that technology or having that Wi-Fi service so our kids can get the education that they need. So pretty much I believe that it was a good idea for our kids to go to school virtually, especially with the spike in COVID cases. I believe that it was a great decision so far. Also, I would like to see if you, what's your standpoint on the PIAA starting the season up regularly on time, I believe in September. pretty much my standpoint on that would be, I believe that we should push that back as well and focus on the safety and health of our students. So what is your opinion?
Yeah, no, thank you for asking. Yeah, I'm in agreement as well. I'm with Governor Wolf in saying that we need to push that back. And we do need to put health and safety at the forefront. I started with the BioBot data at the beginning, which says that 1 in 20 people in Harrisburg have coronavirus. Now, that doesn't mean that they're showing symptoms, or that, but it does mean that they are contagious, because it's a very contagious virus. And it's not so much, and I know our viewers know, it's not so much that that our youth are going to affect one another through sports, but they're going to bring it home, and they're going to bring it home to elderly family members. It's going to have a ripple effect, because that's the way the virus works. And so we've got to take precautions, and that means pushing back sports. It means doing virtual instruction, and things are not going to be the same until we get until we get a vaccine, and I'm sure that's what everybody's hope for is. I know people have said, well, what about testing? And again, I think we're going to have a show on testing here in the near future, but we just don't have the capacity to do a widespread testing. You see that in like Major League Baseball or other sports leagues, where they can actually get test results the same day. It's a very controlled environment. It's very expensive, but they have the resources to do it. We can't do it. So I don't think there's any way to do it safely, and I think that's why that's why the proposal's there. So I think we're in agreement. Anything else you'd like to add, Brian? Okay, great. Well, let's keep going, and I'm going to go to Eric Jackson now. And Eric is both an educator and an assistant pastor. So, Eric, we can talk a little bit about the same questions regarding the Harrisburg School District. And I guess my first question to you is, what's top on your list in terms of what you'd most like to see? Did we lose Eric? Is he? Oh, he's there. Okay, great.
For the invitation, opportunity to be in this panel discussion. Again, I've been in education, public education, for about 40 years, beginning in a district that I grew up in, Chester, who has similar demographics politically, in terms of crime and in terms of the whole school layout. The social and emotional growth that students pretty much, some of us, governed by their environment. And first, I'd like to touch on the idea of the back to school, and I'm certainly in agreement of safety first. And I have looked on the school's website, the district's website, so I know that they have collaborated with other districts and looked at what other districts are doing. So where they have the total back online instruction versus the hybrid, I believe the plan B, which they may move into in the second half of the year, depending on how the coronavirus continues to go and flow. I did want to mention, particularly while Mr. McClanahan and Pastor Scott and Cindy Santos are online, the idea of equity in education, because dollars and cents mean a whole lot. And of course, the late John Lewis and others who fought for educational justice going back to 1954 and since that time, but there's still a lot to be done. So I just wanted to mention, if I could real quickly, a definition I heard recently on a panel with WITF, and they talked about equity in education. And so I kind of put together a couple words to make a basic definition. And I would say that equity in education means having the basic work skills of reading, writing, mathematics that have not been prohibited by any form of discrimination based on gender, ethnic origin, and social economic status. And having said that, we know that dollars and cents make a difference. And there's documentation of where the dollars have flowed from the state level down to the individual school districts. And I know Harrisburg districts have had a history of various things happening with money, some improprieties, I understand. But we certainly need that money to have programs that will help build not just the academic program, but even the social emotional part of education, the affective part of education. That may include some mental health training and support systems being added to the school. Of course, the trauma care information and training that they have going on right now. But those are very important. And I'll add a note real quickly. So I received a call about a young man, and you may have seen on the news, football player from the school district who has been charged with a crime of homicide, or attempted homicide, rather, for correction. And when I began to scroll down and I began to look at different pictures and faces of young men I've seen in the school over the past 5 to 10 years who are on this list. And I thought about, as I knew them in school, whether they had some behaviors that needed to be corrected for school purposes. But I know that the mental health part and the social emotional growth part that students need, along with the academic part, is very important. So having equity in education means getting the resources that are needed to help the whole family and to help the whole child, not just academic curriculums, but whatever the child may need. So I look forward to being part of a review committee, whether it's a textbook review, as we look at all the changes from systemic racism. We need to have some textbook and curriculum changes that speak to, as they call it, culturally responsive teaching. And that's a necessary part, because knowing about who you are and where you come from, in my mind, should be a mandate, just as Philadelphia schools have a mandate for African-American studies. So that would be my initial thing about education, is that there's equity as many corners and ways that it can become equitable, so that they match the schools, suburban schools and other schools in the central Pennsylvania and the state level.
Great. I think those are really important points, and I absolutely also support curriculum which focuses on ethnic studies and local history. I think we often miss that, and I think that's a great way to engage with students and to encourage learning. I'll say that I am a former public school teacher. That's how my first job when I moved to this area in Harrisburg, and it's a passion of mine engaging with youth. And the easiest way to engage is to have a curriculum which speaks to them and appeals to them. And you don't do that if you're just doing a standardized one-size-fits-all curriculum. And the emphasis on funding, I think, is important. And we'll keep talking about this, and we'll talk about it to our other guests as well. But if we're talking about the legacy of institutional racism in the United States, that is, of course, tied to the whole process of suburbanization and redlining and everything. And if your school system is going to be funded by property taxes, then it is essentially going to be steeped in that racist history, which is not fair. It's not equitable. It's not based in equity, and so it has to be compensated against with a different type of funding formula, which is the fair funding formula, or a new system, such as throwing out property taxes, abolishing property taxes, or as the funding method for schools. But you're wearing dual hats, because you're also assistant pastor at the Kingdom Embassy Church. I wanted to, since the topic today really is racism in all of its forms, I wanted to get your perspective on what you as a pastor and what faith-based communities can do and bring to this discussion about how we can address these legacy issues and really come to a greater understanding. And I'll start with the challenging point, which has been made by others, is certainly not new, which is that one of the most segregated times of any week is Sundays, when we go to essentially faith-based communities that are segregated. How do we change that if we can't fundamentally change our worship practices?
Right. Well, I would say, one, that worship practices by denomination and by faith group, yes, they have been established. However, we can work a couple ways. One is through our youth, through youth initiatives. And that has to be something that pastors have to first agree and admit about this separation, this separate time of worship. And we're going to choose where we want to worship, but we can also look at the whole. When you look at the scripture, there's no room for the separation according to race. Having said that, I happen to know Reverend, forget her last, Marie Tribble, who pastors a church on the West Shore. I think it's Disciples of Christ, an African-American woman, pastor. The congregation is predominantly white. I'm at Kingdom Embassy, which is an independent or non-denominational. However, we began as Harambe United Church of Christ in 1993. We were the only African-American church in 260 churches in Penn Central Conference. And one of the things we had done, we had begun a deconstructing racism organization as a part of the Penn Central Conference. And so we had some interchanging relationship with other congregations in the United Church of Christ denomination. So we have to make some intentional efforts to do that. One of the things I've done is I began to connect. I just became a board member with Christian Churches United. I'm also part of working with Heeding the Call. And so when I see organizations that have an open hand to want to communicate and collaborate on things, I make an effort to do that. And again, using our youth, because they're very much open, or more open oftentimes, to adults who may want to cross our arms and cross our hands. And they will tell you, in just like we're having a forum, youth can have forums as well, public forums and discussions and conversations. And so it has to be deliberate effort made to make it happen. And now is the right time with the term systemic racism and institutional racism becoming more household. It's not new to many, but for those who have become new, now is the right time to push some of those curriculum changes and efforts to be made between schools. So I like to see superintendents make intentional efforts to do some conversation and some things in the arts, different things. I like to see some principals do the same thing in Central PA, but it has to be intentional. And having spent 24 years in the military myself, I know that you can institute diversity programs, but that's all they are program. You come in, you have a book, you get some a color coded something, and you leave there with the heart not changed. And we can see many examples of that. I worked in the chaplain office for 19 years of those 24 years. And there was an article came out that they weren't promoting African-American chaplains to officership. And the chief of chaplain, you can read about this. The chief of chaplain had made a statement that African-American chaplains were good as field grade officers, but not in working the larger scope of things. And that certainly was systemic. Mm-hmm. And so we have to be intentional. That's my buzzword, if you may have heard it. Be intentional about whatever we want to see change. We have to make intentional efforts about that. So whether that be in police work, in education, it has to be an intentional effort to make that happen so that our posterity, our children and children's children won't have to deal as much with what we're seeing and facing today.
Great. Yes, absolutely. As intentional as is the process of changing hearts as well, which you are engaged in. It all has to be intentional. And thank you for those comments. We're going to go next to Greg McClanahan. Greg, you have enormous experience over many decades in as a financial advisor. A lot of the talk so far has been on sort of the structural financing of our districts. Do you want to talk about the issue of fair funding?
Actually, I'd like to make my comments fairly short because there are too many smart people in the room who can offer quite a bit more to the conversation than I can. Can I punt on that and go back to one of the questions I submitted to you?
Sure. Yeah.
The first question was the one that you read the first part of, which was about the school districts. I won't punt completely. I think the financing of Pennsylvania school districts is a little bit complicated because I think that there's a feeling that the state's share is inadequate, and that's a pretty good argument. The reliance on property taxes for such a high percentage of the total revenues for a school district is controversial, but it's worked for a long time. So I really don't know what the right answer to how to properly finance urban and suburban school districts. So that's why I have to kind of lay off that question. I did have some thoughts on the police issue.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember reading, and correct me if I'm wrong, when Thomas Carter made some comments regarding feeling that one of the difficulties of running urban or any police department is dealing with the unions, and how the unions make it very, very difficult to get rid of officers who may have either crossed the line or probably shouldn't be in that line of work. By the way, the same is sort of true of school districts. They get some bad teachers. Unions make it very difficult to get rid of them. Why doesn't the Harrisburg City Council have enough power to work within the contract that they have with the unions and the police to make it easier for the city to get rid of the bad apples?
Right. So that's a good question. I would say that it is possible to get rid of the bad apples, and that we've done it in Harrisburg, and we will continue to do it. I am not one that blames unions. I'm pro-union as a Democrat. I understand the importance of collective bargaining. I understand why unions advocate to protect their members. I think you've actually seen in Harrisburg the FOP express an interest in participating in an advisory board, which is at least a start. I think that's a good thing. Jason Brinker, who's the head of the FOP, participated in a panel last year in which he said that officers would like to be a part of the dialogue, a part of the solution. So some of the things that are in the contract are could be renegotiated. There are certain aspects whereby when you put a police officer on administrative leave because you're doing an investigation, maybe an incident has occurred, we're required to pay that officer. And some people don't understand, well, why can't you suspend somebody without pay? Well, that's a contractual thing. The residency requirement is a contractual thing. We started, Terrence was talking about that at the beginning. Why don't we have a residency requirement? And one of the reasons we don't is because, and we used to in Harrisburg, is because when the city went into receivership, it was negotiated by the then receiver. It was given basically a removal of the residency requirement was given to the FOP in exchange for increased contributions towards healthcare and other types of cuts. So these things can be negotiated. Council votes on the contract, and they can vote it down. There are ways that we can focus on how to improve collective bargaining, and other cities have different agreements. So I'm not going to lay the blame at the unions. I think that what is important is that we do make sure that we get rid of the bad apples. And again, we fired, suspended, removed, and done other things with officers that have been problematic. Now, it does require a commitment to do that. I just believe that in Harrisburg, we do have the right leadership at the moment. We've got a commissioner that really is committed to making sure that each and every officer is reflective of the best possible spirited community. Let me ask you another question. Maybe this is one you submitted, maybe it isn't, but you can take a shot at it, which is, talking about the current healthcare pandemic, in your judgment, how has the current pandemic highlighted problems that existed even before the outbreak for school districts? Maybe exacerbated financial issues or other types of issues?
Well, again, you've asked a sort of a tricky question. I can sort of turn it around and say, how is the pandemic affecting the finances of the city of Harrisburg? Earned income taxes are probably going to be reduced. Sales taxes are going to be reduced for the state. The total amount of revenue generated that supports school districts is going to be reduced. And so I think that the 2020-21 fiscal year is going to be challenging, and 2021-22 will be equally challenging. And I'm not sure where the money is going to come from, because we don't have something called modern monetary theory, which is essentially the right to print money because the U.S. government owns the printing presses. You're going to have to generate the dollars to pay these contractual obligations. And I think for cities and states, and city, states, and school districts, it's going to be very, very tough going. I think what's going on right now in Congress is a battle to provide more funding in this second tranche of what may be as much as $3 trillion to give money to city states. And I suppose the spinoff will go to school districts as well to keep them going. But to say that this virus isn't going to have enormous financial impact would be just totally incorrect. I think it's going to have lasting impact. But I'll turn the question around. How do you see the city's finances affected by this?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And as I alluded to before, really the cities and the school district finances are intertwined in many respects, and we share the same tax base for sure, and we often receive the same shares of similar revenues. So I see the city's revenues impacted by potentially as much as 10% for this year, for 2020. That's a very significant number, but it's going to pale in comparison to next year. I think next year we're going to really begin to see the effects, especially in Harrisburg, of the business privileges tax, which is a tax which businesses pay on their gross receipts, and that is going to be significantly impacted. And one of the real issues for Harrisburg, and this is not for the school district, but for Harrisburg, is our budget is tied very much to parking, and our parking revenues are in dear trouble, and we're going to be off by millions of dollars next year. In fact, the whole parking deal that was put together as a sort of foundation of the Harrisburg Strong Plan, which, not to get too technical, but was a lease of the parking system to the Commonwealth, and then the Commonwealth leased back a lot of those spaces. That system is currently not able to pay its bond payments, and is having to draw on a reserve fund to make those. There is no money to make the city's payments, and it's only going to be compounded next year. So we have to hope for really a vaccine and a speedy return to normal, but in the meantime, it's going to be enormous issues. So we could talk about the economics of this all day. The city is going to issue a mid-year report which will explain some of this, and council will have that when they get back for their session on the 25th. So thanks.
For help for the cities and the state and other public entities.
Yeah, let's ask one of the legislators, and I'll go to Senator DeSanto next, if that's right. And I know George Scott, I know you have to leave here coming up pretty quickly, and we're coming on the noon hour. But let's stick to our order, and we'll go to Senator DeSanto next, and then right on to you, Mr. Scott. Senator, we've now sort of shifted into a conversation about finances. Can you talk just briefly in big terms? How worried should we be about the fiscal picture for the Commonwealth, and then what is that impact gonna have on local municipalities and school districts and everything else during the current pandemic?
Well, good morning to everyone. I guess it's afternoon now. Good afternoon.
Almost.
I want to thank Harrisburg Community Black Think Tank and the mayor for hosting today's dialogue. And I'd also would like to answer 3 or 4 questions that were posed to me before, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
But before I do that, I just do want to acknowledge the reason that we're meeting here today. Our nation was founded on the principles that all men were created equal, and obviously the country's struggled very long to unite people of different backgrounds, and we must continue the pursuit to strive for an ideal equality of opportunity for everybody. And to me, that means recognizing the disparities and disadvantages present in our communities of colors, and trying to bring these harsh realities through the disenfranchised of our community to really spend time listening to these voices. And I think the unjust murder of Mr. Floyd has reignited this conversation on race relations in America. And I understand the Black Lives Matter movements is about highlighting the racism and implicit bias that still resides in different facets of our society. And I fully support the protesters' rights to peacefully assemble and demonstrate America's need to listen to this. And as your state senator, I'm here to listen, try to engage in this conversation, and hopefully we can improve the Commonwealth. So with saying that, I believe the first question directed to me was the citizen review boards with the police. And as general principles, I support transparency in government and citizen involvement in oversight of government. Truly, that is important. It's one of the main reasons why I got involved in government, because I was not satisfied with government's response to my concerns. And to the extent that state law needs to be changed in this regard, I look forward to working with the city and the other stakeholders here to make the changes that hopefully we can do. Pertaining to the school resource officers, I did want to touch on that a little bit. The Department of Education requires every school resource officer to take the basic school resource officer course of instruction or an equivalent course. And it's approved by the Pennsylvania Commission on Crime and Delinquency. So I didn't want to overlook that. And just trying to be respectful of everybody's time. I know I'm running through a little bit quickly here, but the Harrisburg School District, as you know, Mayor, we've met many times along with Patty Kim and requested state intervention in the school districts, and we were united on that, even being across different parties. And we supported the appointment of the receiver, and I believe we're all appreciative of the reforms that the current administration is doing there. I supported increased funding with the schools, and have also supported educational choice, which I think is important to allow parents to tailor their educational experience that they need and deemed important for their children. So we've been working very hard on that together. And as you know, the Harrisburg School District spent, I think it was 19, the last figures that were out, $19,500 per student, which ranked us 146th out of the 500 different school districts, which is the top 30%. And the state support of that was $10,300. That's a significant amount. Sometimes people don't understand that amount. But although the system isn't perfect, the bipartisan funding formula does recognize the differences between urban schools and those with high poverty and English as a second language. So we are working at the state level trying to address all those things. And I just wanted to briefly touch on that. And now I'll try to answer your question with the government finances. As you indicated, you're having significant challenges with the parking revenue. And Pat Brown, the Senate chair of the Appropriations Committee, released his monthly report. And at this point, and we're still not 100% clear on this, we're going to be $2.7 billion whole, starting out with a deficit. That's $2.7 billion. It's a huge number. It's going to affect all operations of state government. Although in our 12 months budget, we have fully funded schools and some other operations that we're required to fund as far as pension obligations and so on. But we have a very difficult November coming up where we are going to have to resolve the rest of this issue. And, I would point out that with the CARES funding that we have committed $150 million to school safety and security moving forward so far. So I think that's just a general round answer there if you have anything else to discuss.
Well, it's a very scary number, and it really deserves its own show and its own careful, considered conversation. And may be able to come back to you with a couple follow-ups, but I do want to get to George Scott because I know he has to go. So I'm gonna bring you up, Mr. Scott, and you've been listening to this interesting conversation. We've touched on all sorts of different topics. I'll let you approach it in however you'd like, but I would like to start with the issue of police reform and get your opinion on what we should be doing, and then maybe we can talk about education and fair funding.
Well, thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thanks to Terrence and all the others for being here today. Senator DeSanto, thank you for being here today as well. It's part of this important conversation. So police reform, I think context matters. And I think this is part of what Eric Jackson was trying to hit on, and some others as well. You know, so we have this context of institutional racism in our society, systemic racism going back 400 years. So as we look at an issue like police reform, we have to consider the broader context. That context obviously is something that it can't be fixed just solely within the Harrisburg Police Department or within the city of Harrisburg. It's got to be an effort that takes in every aspect of our society. And it's good to see the movement that has come out of that. I think the Black Lives Matter movement have really highlighted that this is an issue that the American public is ready to move forward on, and it's long overdue for action on that to build on the gains of the civil rights movement, which have stood dormant for a long time. I think we see that, for example, the Voting Rights Act, which just had its 55th anniversary, and yet the legislation hasn't been renewed. So we've got to make sure that things like that are getting done at the federal level as well as fixes here at the state level. At the local level, I remember that you and Chief Carter and others have pointed out that Harrisburg has actually been very proactive on police reform. Of the 8 key measures that have been identified in many circles, I believe Harrisburg has done 6 of those already, I think is what I heard you say at the Reservoir Park. And I think that's great. And I think the Civilian Review Board is an appropriate step to take. And the process that City Council is working through is great to get the public comment on that. Civilian oversight is and should be in place. You know, I served 20 years active duty in the military. A fundamental principle of the U.S. military is we have civilian oversight and control. And so I think the policing function deserves civilian oversight and control. The details obviously need to be worked out. But this fixing this is more than simply the oversight. It also gets into the police having the things like the de-escalation training, the diversity, and as you and others have pointed out, trying to get that force drawn from the local community. Community policing is absolutely important. One of the things that I've heard from quite a few folks that I've talked to in terms of the community policing here in Harrisburg is that there's challenges in retention. That Harrisburg does a fairly good job of training and fielding the police force, but then they struggle sometimes with retention. So that's something I think that state government should take a look at. How can we help Harrisburg and other municipalities with retention of the force so that your best trained officers, you don't lose them after 5 years to a surrounding community. Beyond that, I think we've got to make sure that we look at the police functions that are being conducted. I think just like with teachers, we ask our police force to do so much. And I think we need to look at those functions closely and see, are there certain ones that we can parse out to others? So for example, I know Dauphin County has got co-responders, which I believe are working within the city of Harrisburg as well as within the county to go to situations that maybe don't necessarily need the skills of a police officer, but maybe perhaps someone who is more trained and expert in mental health or other issues like that. Obviously, we don't want to defund the police. What we want to do is make sure that, as I think Terrence said at the beginning, that the police are truly serving and protecting the community, every community, to include all the communities here within Harrisburg and within the surrounding areas. Beyond that, going on to education, the fair funding formula is incredibly complex. It has been a major step in the right direction, but part of the problem that as I understand it with the city of Harrisburg and the school district here is not only the past performance, but also the fact that the students that come into the Harrisburg School District oftentimes bring a whole set of challenges. And I think this is what Eric Jackson was talking to with his experience both as an educator and as a pastor. So we have to look at more than simply academically how are we supporting these young men and women, but the whole child. How are we helping them with their social and emotional needs? And I think that's why the cost per pupil in a district like Harrisburg is high in comparison with other places because they have some unique challenges that are faced in the classroom. So I think the Yes, there is more money in the Harrisburg School District, but there's also more need. And one of the things I think we need to do for Harrisburg is take a look. We looked at cyber charter school funding formula, because right now what I hear over and over again from both teachers and administrators in the public school arena is that every time they lose a student to a cyber school, and I'm not talking about the Harrisburg Academy, which is an internal cyber effort, online effort that they've set up, but actual commercial cyber schools, that the amount of funds that they transfer over to the cyber school far exceed the cost on the receiving end to educate that children, that particular child. So we've got to relook that as well. Those are a few thoughts. I know we were covering so many topics here.
Sure.
I'm happy to stick around for a few more minutes as well, because I think this is a vital discussion.
Yeah, thank you so much. You brought up many topics I'd love to follow up on, and can't do everything right now. I will say, regarding 8 Can't Wait, which you've heard and that we've been having this community conversation about in the city of Harrisburg. These are reforms that are based on best practices for use of force policies throughout the country. That process is very much ongoing. We're going to have a future show with an update on that. I'm going to invite the police back to talk about that training and to talk about where we are. We're going to make revisions this year to the use of force policy, and it's been a very good conversation. You also brought up the Dauphin County sponsored co-responder program, which is working very well in the city of Harrisburg, and I'd like to do a future show on that as well, so people can really understand how approaches to dealing with mental health are changing. I think we need to do even more and invest even more resources into that program, but it's been piloted very successfully. And then, of course, we could talk more about all the issues, including cyber charters, because that's a very interesting context, given that now almost everybody is in a cyber charter because we've switched entirely to online learning for the start of the school year. So what does that mean? But we've had a great conversation. Clearly, we're going to have to do this again, and we're running out of time, but we have to leave time for the public. So I'm going to hand things over to Momin. And Momin, maybe you can field some questions that have come from the public and share them with the appropriate guests.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. We have, I think, time for 2 questions at least here, and they're both directed to you, but if the guests want to also hop in, they can. The first question is from Harriet. She says, from what I've been told, not a lot of people want to be a police officer in the city of Harrisburg because it's harder work for less pay compared to counties right across the bridge. Is this an issue that's being addressed, and is there a way to incentivize people to want to be police officers in Harrisburg City?
Okay, thank you for that question, and this is a real issue. The question of pay and compensation, it is just a fact that if that is your primary motivation for being a police officer, and it isn't for everyone, but if you're going to earn less working in an urban environment like Harrisburg than you are in a suburban one. Harrisburg has many more police officers than smaller suburban municipal departments, and we can't afford to pay as much. So you might make 30% more, and you'd have a lot less responsibility potentially as a suburban police officer. That said, in Harrisburg, you're going to have a real opportunity to be involved in all sorts of aspects of policing, and it can be a very fulfilling, and action-paced, form of a career. So, I don't think that's the only determining factor for police officers. Also, last year we did revise our salary scale in a very dramatic way to try and get at this issue. We now have a sort of stepped salary scale, which gave increased additional payments for especially for our younger officers, and basically adopted a new model that it was different from the old model in which everybody advanced at the sort of same pace, but this model, which has certain benchmarks and rewards officers for staying for longer. In fact, prior to that, we'd put some penalties in for leaving early. But it's a longer topic, and we can have a conversation about the current collective bargaining agreement and how we pay our police officers. But financially speaking, we have budgeted for about 150 police officers. We currently have closer to 130 police officers on the force, and there are resources there that we may be able to redeploy in other ways. When we talk about defunding the police, what we really mean, I think, in many respects, is taking some of the money that is currently going to police and utilizing it in other ways. And if we can't hire the people we need, maybe we can hire community police officers, co-responders, and other things. That was a long answer to that question, but go ahead, Roman.
Sure, and I think we have time for one more, and the other questions that come in, we'll respond to those. Sian asks, also a police question, what kind of ongoing community outreach is being developed to foster communication and build relationships between the police and the community?
And that is a good question and a good point. We have a community policing corps in Harrisburg. We have a very good team. Many know our community policing coordinator, Blake Lynch, who has basically spent the last 4 months of his life doing predominantly feeding the residents of Harrisburg through the community policing partnership with the food bank, which is every week and indeed every day out there in the community trying to provide healthy, fresh food. That was something I participated in again just last week, and is continuing to really try its best to meet the demand. It's an example of how, in the midst of a pandemic, we've sort of redefined community policing to be engaging the community in a new way, focused on food safety and basic food distribution. We have a substation which has just now been open. It's been open for several weeks. We have proposals on the table to increase the number of community police officers, or supplement the number with community service officers who would be civilianized positions that we talked a little bit about earlier. But there's a lot in store for improving community relations. And I'd like to say, from the policing standpoint, they are interested in this conversation and dialogue. And sometimes I've even heard commentary about how many people in Harrisburg feel that they don't want any involvement of the police on the community review board. But I think having some involvement, having the FOP involved, or I believe the proposal was to have the commissioner be an ex officio member, so not a voting member, but a member there, I think was meant in the spirit of dialogue, not is in an effort to sort of stifle anyone's expression or to intimidate people. So those are just some of the issues that come to mind. Do we have anything we can direct to the group?
I think those were the only questions that have come in so far.
All right. Well, let me do this. We're going to end. Let me go back to Terrence and let him direct a question if he'd like to anyone in the group, because we did sort of promise that at the outset. And I know we've talked a lot, and we're going to have to do this again. And there's much more that we could discuss. But Terrence, did you have any questions for the group you'd like to close this out with?
I actually do, and I'd like to say, first of all, this was a tremendous conversation. The time flew by. It didn't seem like we had enough time. You know, this is obviously something that can't be resolved in an hour or so. I'd like to ask everyone that's on the panel that we maybe not necessarily have to have it in this forum, but I would like for us to continue to have this kind of conversation and dialogue between the people in this group, because I think that each and every one of you have some very serious, input to this community, and we need to find ways to stretch this dialogue. Having said that, I had questions, and this is for Senator DeSantis, this is for Pastor Scott, and this is also for the mayor.
Okay.
You guys said a lot of things, and I took out a lot of notes, but I had another question, so I'm just going to ask that one. With the climate of the situation with Breonna Taylor, Mr. Floyd, there has been a creation of a Black militia group by the name of the NFAC. And I won't read out what the acronym means, but it is a black militia group that feels that there is a need to address, the not just the systemic racism that Black America deals with, but the inequity that we deal with regards to representation by the police, that protect and serve element. We don't get that. So now there has been a black militia who is formulated saying that they're going to ensure that the police, don't just come in and assault people, but do their job. What do you think? I'd like to direct this to you first, Mr. DeSantos, about this militia group and the formation of it.
All right, and I'll just say we'll end on that question, and what we should resolve to do is to have this panel back again in the future. And I just want to thank everybody for participating. So, but Senator, we'll go to you, and then we'll go to George Scott, and then I'll close this out.
Okay, well, thank you. I'm not familiar with that group at all, so I can't comment about that. I can comment, though, that as matters of police reform and oversight of the police, when the House was passing the police reform package to begin with, I contacted the mayor, Chief Carter, and Deputy Chief Moody, and we had a meeting prior to that, and I had a discussion with them to get their input about the proposed reforms. And Harrisburg's police department is a high-functioning police department and had no issues with the reforms mentioned. And it's obviously an ongoing process, but it's important to note that as a result of the climate that you referenced, that police reform is moving forward through the legislature. And the first law that's going to be extremely helpful, I believe, is establishing an electronic database containing the separation records of police officers, so law enforcement agencies can conduct thorough background checks prior to hiring. And I also think it permits a police department to produce a hiring report indicating the reason for hiring an officer with various types of misconduct in his or her records, because you have to also understand with misconduct allegations, they're not uncommon with the police. So, and not all of them are justified. Some of them are justified, and we need to really make sure we focus on those. The second law, which is important as well, is the mental health evaluations for officers as a condition of continued employment at the request of the chief or within 30 days of involving lethal force. So the law also requires training on trauma-informed care and de-escalation, which I think is very important. We really need to focus on de-escalation techniques, as well as implicit bias and cultural awareness. And finally, the Senate has passed 2 more pieces of legislation that all mandate police departments maintain records and issue reports of use of force incidents, and other proposals which ban the use of chokeholds and things like that. And I think all of these efforts are going to be accessible to the public and are going to result in a better policing for the residents of not only the city and the 15th district, but Pennsylvania as well.
Thank you, Senator. And Mr. Scott.
Well, the issue is really that the measures that have been passed so far by the state are absolutely helpful, and they've been bipartisan in nature, but those are a start point, not the end point. This is an issue which what we're seeing with the police and what I think Terrence was bringing up with these militias, what we've got a certain part of our society, our communities of color, particularly the Black community, that feel threatened at times by the people who are chartered to serve and protect them. And it makes me think of conversations that I've had with other parents who are people of color, particularly Black parents, and have told me about the conversations they have to have, particularly with their teenage sons, about what they must do, how they must act when they are pulled over by a police officer. This is very widespread, and it's not a conversation that I have to have with my child. So we need to fix everything that goes into that. So part of it is certainly police reform, but this has to be more than police reform. We've got to make sure that we're looking at the whole picture, and so that the issues that Harrisburg and other municipalities deal with, where there's a lack of economic opportunity, that those are addressed. That the inadequate wages that so many people are experiencing right now, that those are addressed. The minimum wage hasn't been raised since 2006. And so we've got to take a hard look at that. We've got to look at things like access to healthcare, making sure that it's affordable and accessible for everyone in our society and not just those who happen to be well off. We've got to make sure that our public education system, which is the foundation for our economy and for our democracy, that it is strengthened and not weakened by various efforts to divert funds to other sources or to pull out the rug for its funding. Absolutely, property taxes needs to be relooked and needs to be reformed, but we can't simply eliminate that because this is a multi-billion-dollar cost, and we have to have a plan in place before we simply remove the rug. So these are really complex issues. I think we've taken some good initial steps on policing, both in Harrisburg and here within the state, but we've still got a long way to go. And to come back to the whole thing of the militia, I understand why the militia exists, but I think we've got, frankly, too many militias, period. And what they reflect is that the weakening of the rule of law in our nation. We are fundamentally a rule of law nation, but those rules have to be applied equally to all citizens. And we have to make sure that we pursue nonviolent solutions, as did John Lewis, as did Dr. King and others, in order to remedy that state of affairs.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Scott. And that would be my position as well. I'm for a nonviolent approach to systemic change. It can be harder, more gradual, more difficult, but I believe that I'm anti-violence and anti-militarization. Just in general as change agents in our society. Now, obviously, we have a long and distinguished history of militias and the right to form militias in the United States. Indeed, the Second Amendment is based on the belief in a well-regulated militia. I understand that. At the same time, I think it's incumbent on us as policy makers to bring about the change through nonviolent and structural means that are going to make a difference. So I understand why the militia is forming, but I would hope that it could be it would not be necessary if elected officials and community leaders are actually doing their job and promoting the change in peaceful ways. So thank you all so much for a great conversation. At home, if you're watching, I hope you enjoyed it. Again, thank you to the Harrisburg Black Think Tank. They did a great job in bringing together a very exciting panel for today's conversation. I've already previewed a number of upcoming shows, so with that, I'll just say I hope you'll continue to join us every Friday at noon for these community conversations, these important conversations. I want to thank everyone for watching. And until next time, I'm Mayor Eric Papenfuss saying stay home, stay safe, and stay healthy. And we'll see you next week at noon on Community Conversations.